and welcome back to another video. In this video, I am reassembling the 2.5 engine for the Subaru Outback. As you can see, I already have the engine dropped in. I didn't decide to film that because visually, you can't tell much of what I'm doing. You'll just have to finesse it in yourself and figure it out, but you still have to lift up the transmission. It's a bit of a trick to get the transmission up at the right height, and then get the engine at the right angle to slide in with the studs and mate up perfectly with the transmission. And then you drop it back down on the frame, make sure the engine mount studs go through the frame, and then you're ready to bolt it up. You put transmission bolts in, of course. You torque them down. I usually don't use a torque wrench on there because it's kind of hard to fit the torque wrench back here for those big studs that go here and in here and all the way down. At the very bottom, of course, you have those two nuts that you have to tighten. So I just take a wrench and I get it as tight as I can. Obviously, don't go crazy because you don't want to break anything. After those are on, I then mount, torque down the engine mounts, which I believe those are about 60 to 62 foot-pounds. Again, you can also just torque them as tight as you want there. Well, as tight as you can get, not want. You also have the belt housing bolts here. The flywheel bolts, I mean. There's 4 of them. You got to put those back on. Those also have a specific torquing. According to the manual for these flywheel bolts that are in there, you torque those down to 25 to 30 foot-pounds. I went ahead and did 30 foot-pounds. And then, of course, don't forget to put this bolt back on. And then, of course, I replugged in the O2 sensor down there, which, of course, the nut at the bottom back here has a little bracket that holds the wire for that O2 sensor so it's not out hitting anything that it shouldn't. So at this point, I'm just going to show you what to do next once you have the engine in here and everything bolted up to the transmission, those flywheels. Because after that, it's mainly just putting on the intake manifold, connecting a whole bunch of wires and hoses, maybe cleaning up some surfaces, a couple other things as well. Oh, and of course, the starter back here goes in, so you have one stud bolt that goes right through the transmission into the engine that holds the starter, and then down below you also have a nut that also holds the starter in place. That is a 17mm nut that bolts onto a stud sticking out of the transmission back there. Don't forget about your exhaust. You have to get new gaskets for the exhaust manifold, of course. And you bolt those up, and I believe the torque specs for the exhaust studs are 22 foot-pounds. If you're not sure about torque specs, you can always find them on the internet, or if you have a manual, you can always refer to that. So I believe the purpose of this video is just going to show you some extra steps and recommendations of things you should do while you have the engine torn apart like this. And we're going to start by cleaning your throttle body on the intake manifold. Cleaning this now makes it a whole lot easier because it's not bolted to the engine. You have a lot more access to things. But it's important to clean this throttle body because, as you can see in there, around the edges of that, it's pretty dirty. And a dirty throttle body will, it can do a couple things, but it can reduce your car's performance. So you want to clean that, and having a clean throttle body just means usually a better running and operating vehicle, which is what we want. And of course, it's easier to clean the surface here. We have to clean that for the new gasket that's going on. And then you can clean up any other things that you feel need it, like maybe some wire connections here that might be a little dirty, where hoses are going to connect. One of the things I also did before putting the engine back in is I cleaned some of the grounding cables. You have a grounding cable down here, right there. And you have one on the other side as well. As you can see, once the engine's back in, it's kind of hard to get access to those, so I took them apart and cleaned them while the engine was out, and they were pretty corroded, so it's a good thing I cleaned them. So I recommend you check all your grounding cables that are hard to get to while the engine is out. Of course, there's some other grounding cables up here on the strut towers that those are no problem to get to later on if you need to. Now they make throttle body cleaner. I thought I had some, I guess I do not, so I'm just going to use some carburetor cleaner. So you just want to spray your cleaner in there, of course. And you just go in and give it a good wipe down. of course, open up the throttle to get access to the side of the fins there. See, with this out of the car, it makes it a whole lot easier. You can get better leverage, and you can clean all that gunk out of there. There we go. It's a little cleaner. It's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than it was. This whole thing was pretty dirty. So there we go with that. I'm going to clean up a couple other things, check some hoses. If you wanted to, this would be a good time to clean fuel injectors. And yeah, just do visual inspection, clean up anything you want, and we'll clean up this median surface here for the gasket, and we'll get this bolted onto the engine. Alright, so get your surfaces nice and clean like so. And check for anything that also might need fixed. Look for bad hoses. This would be a good time to replace your old PCV hoses and lines. One thing, I don't know if I did this or whoever had the vehicle before me, this clamp is off. This needs to be back to where it's supposed to be, so I'll fix that in a second. And then next, make sure your engine bay is ready for your intake manifold. Make sure these surfaces are nice and clean as well. And now it's time to drop it in. And of course, before you put in your intake manifold, it might be easier now to attach some of your other components like your starter and your heater core hoses back there. And make sure everything's bolted down and tightened and ready to go. So next we're going to put our gaskets in for the intake manifold. It's pretty easy. They got little holes right here. There's little stubs that these line up to, so it'll hold your gasket in place so you don't have to worry about it skirting around. And if you're curious, here's the part number for this gasket. Give the surfaces a final wipe down real quick. Also, this is a good time to make sure there's no debris inside the valves here going into the cylinder, so you don't want anything damaging all your hard work. Let's do a final little check, make sure nothing's falling in there, such as a bolt or a nut, a washer, anything. So last thing you want to have happen, everything looks good and clean, cool. And there is no top down or anything, so they're both the same on each side. So there's one, they slip on like so. And there's the other gasket. Put it on like so. And it slips on, easy as that. Now before we can bolt down, of course, the intake manifold, you have to set it in here, of course, but you have to connect some wires. We have 3 different wire connections we have to do here, and 2 hose connections. And once you have all this taken care of, because it'll be underneath the intake manifold, then we can bolt the sucker down, and afterwards we can attach this little pipe back here, if you can see that. That also has to be connected. It's EGR pipe. So make sure everything's out of your way, that nothing's going to get in your way when you do this. It looks like we're ready to drop it in. Of course, you want to be careful not to damage your gaskets. I'm just going to set it in there like that for a second. There we go. Got some extra light. I'm going to probably block your view here. There's no easy way to show you, but you want to make sure your connectors are all connected, right? So we have this white one here. There's only one way it goes in. I believe it's that way. Would have been difficult to show you, so I just went ahead and did it. But once you have those 3 wires connected and the 2 hoses underneath, you want to check to make sure everything is correct. So make sure, of course, double check everything. But yeah, you have those 2 sensors that connect to your water pipe here. You got to make sure those are connected. You have that white connector back there. You have the 2 hoses. Then after that, you can do a quick run to make sure everything else lines up. You should have a sensor here with this wire, and then as well as that sensor here. You should also have a sensor here, which is right there. This is in the way. There we go. That should just connect right there, like so. One connector there. You can give these a quick clean if you want with That just slides on top of there like so. This one connects right there, like that. So everything's lining up, and with that we can start bolting everything back together. Of course, you can check your other sensors. I'm going to just plug this one in. There we go. Oh. Yep, just make sure everything's lined up, make sure your gasket's good, and then we'll torque it down. Alright, so then with your intake manifold bolts in, there's going to be 4 on each side, so a total of 8. You want to torque them to a maximum 192 inch-pounds. That's that one. Driver's side is a little bit more difficult to get to because of everything in the way. There's that one. There it goes. That was weird. That one don't want to do it. Other side's much easier to get to. Again, just these 4 bolts. This is a 12mm socket. Double check again. Good. 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 Alright. With that in place, just connect any vacuum lines and hoses. I'm going to connect the fuel lines back up. That'll be the next thing. So we have the fuel lines. Don't want to get these mixed up. This one route's under here. There's one big one, so that one's pretty easy. That's the main line here. That one just goes on like so. Before bolting up the intake manifold, you want to get this EGR pipe right here into the intake manifold. Otherwise, you probably won't be able to get it in unless you loosen the other one down there, which that's going to be hard to get to. So once you have this in here, then you can tighten down the intake manifold. It's a 17mm wrench to tighten this, and then I also left it loose so that way this can wiggle back and forth to fit in here. With the right angle, you can, if your hand is small enough like mine, you can get down in here with a 17mm wrench. It'd be easier if you had a small one, but I used a normal size wrench to be able to tighten that one from above up here. So I tighten that one and this one. Now I'm going to put the EGR valve on right here, and it should be good to go. Alright, so I'm going to put the throttle cables back. So again, those 2 bolts go through here, and then you have to put the cables back through the throttle plates here, again with those slots. So those bolts are 10mm. You'll have to fish it in between the cables, just cinch those down. They don't have to be crazy tight. And you have to get these cables in here. So again, to do that, loosen up the cables by initiating the throttle. That'll loosen this up, and you'll have to get the cables through that little notch right there so the head can slip through. And then you also have a little bit of a groove right there that the cable has to go in between. It's pretty simple, so not too big of a deal. And then of course reconnect your hoses that connect to this plate here. Alright, I'm going to put the power steering pump back in place. Before I do that, the tape that was wrapped around this cable right here, it's old, brittle, so I'm just going to replace it with some new electric tape just to protect that wire connection a little bit. Now the wire is protected a little bit more, and I'll just plug it right back into the sensor. There we go. Now we can put our power steering in. So like I said, I left everything connected, so it's just sitting over here to the side. So now I can just pick it up and put it back where it needs to be. And then we can bolt her up. And to take note of, you have a bolt in the back here, which is this one. Then you have 2 bolts in the front, but they're 2 different sizes, so take note of that. here's the 2 different size bolts. This one goes to the far right of the pump, this one to the left, which is down out of sight. So this one goes right in here. So that long one goes right down here. The small one just underneath the pulley here is over here, and then this back one drops into this back bracket. I'll show you up close in a second. Alright, so your 3 main bolts. Again, you have the one right down there. Then you have the 2 up front. This one here's the longer one. And then the other one, probably won't be able to see it because it's kind of dark now the way it's right there behind the pulley. You'll find it, but you might have to wiggle around the pump, of course, to get all these bolts in. And then you have these 2 bolts here, which just secure the power steering lines in place. These are 10 millimeters for these 2, and then these 3 for the pump are 12 millimeter. Something to be aware of, this is where your spark plug wires run, and then you have it right underneath these power steering lines, right here. So to be able to get the lines down through there, your cables, you might have to keep this loose so you can lift it up and sneak the power, not the power steering lines, but the spark plug wires underneath the power steering lines. When you're tightening these bolts, just tighten them nice and snug. Don't go crazy. You don't want to strip these bolts or break anything. So just tighten it until it feels nice and snug. It's not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to put the spark plug wires in. So I recommend before you connect anything, just fish these wires underneath the power steering here so it's easier. And these basically go in one way. You can see you have this little hole right here. And if you look at the valve cover, this hole needs to be on this side. Has to be going this way, so the hole is towards the back of the engine. These just simply slide right in. Pretty simple. Have to wiggle them around a bit once you feel it go in there. Line it up a little bit. Make sure that hole's going to go over the valve cover hole there, so that just prevents dirt getting down in there, and you just push it in until it clicks. You'll feel it. There it goes. Easy as that. Let's do this one next. Getting caught up on stuff. The driver's side's always more difficult because there's less room over there. I already did it. I have smaller hands. If you have larger hands, it might be a bit more of a issue, but easy as that. There we go. Yeah, so they go in just like that, and you can fish the wires through and button them up through these connectors. So for the engine, the spark plug wires with this type of connection here go on this side of the engine, and then the spark plugs over here with this connection will connect over here. For this particular setup, depending on the year of your engine and vehicle, might be slightly different, but for the most part, the spark plug wires are pretty simple to hook up. Next, I'm replacing the PCV hose down here in the block. So I put it down in here. You have to also use the clamps and to clamp the bottom. I also put the second clamp in there for later when I attach this plastic piece back on. Be careful, it is plastic, it will break. And I recommend cleaning out all the carbon deposits down in that tube, as well as these pieces here, because with age they tend to clog up, and your PCV system, you do not want that to clog up, because that'll build up pressure in the engine and you can end up blowing seals. Also make sure to put this bracket back on, cinch up this bolt, then you have these wires that you just re-plug back in, so go ahead and do that. Just slide in like so, click. This one goes here, and this bottom one goes in here like that, and they just click right in. There we go, wires are re-hooked up. And if you haven't already, make sure your O2 sensor wire right there is also connected. Here's more of the PCV system. Here's the PCV valve. I recommend replacing this. It should rattle, so when you shake it, you should hear it rattle. You can also clean them out, so make sure this is good. And here's why it is important to make sure these hoses are actually clear. Try to get this in better lighting. I don't know if you can see that in there, but it is starting to seize off with carbon where the PCV valve was. This can happen throughout the hose system, so make sure you bust all that loose and clean it out, or replace the hoses. With the spark plug wires back in, I'm going to put in the bottom of the air box back. I cleaned it out, so I recommend doing that. It gets all the debris and dirt. And this just slides in here. Make sure the MAF sensor's out of the way. So just lower this down in here. And this just slides right over to that little connection. And also you have this part that has to stick in this hole. So you just have to carefully line it up. Go. It looks like it's in. Make sure this lip is inside. It looks like it is. So we're good to bolt it down now. There's 2 bolts. And these bolts are 14 millimeters. Actually, they are 12 millimeters in their mind. Torque them down nice and tight. Don't over tighten it because you don't want to crack the plastic or strip the bolt, but you'll probably crack the plastic before you strip the bolt, I imagine. Just cinch it down just a little bit. It's nothing crazy. There we go. Alright, so I'm putting this air box back on, and this type has the bracket, so here it is. Just fish that back in there, and it's held on by 2 bolts, and then this sits on top and gets bracketed on. So go ahead and do that, and then you just put this over the throttle body, but also make sure the hoses go back, so you have the 2 PCV hoses right here that have to be connected. So it might be easier to do that now. So get the first one. Alright, one hose on, find the other PCV hose, which is here. Then you just connect that to the throttle body, and then the hose off to the right. Before you tighten anything down, get that one connected. There we go. And then you tighten everything down. So we have the bolts here for the brackets. Line that up. Get this started. And then this side here. Alright, then you want to connect the rest of your PCV system, which is down here, those hoses. You have that hose with the clamp right there. Connects to the air box. And where the clamp is, it connects to that plastic piece. And then the top of this goes to your PCV valve, which bolts in right there in the intake manifold. Here's the old PCV valve. I actually just cleaned it up with carburetor cleaner. Now it's good as new. That's the sound you want to hear. So just cleaning it up, freed all the gunk out, and it should work. And this just threads right in here like so. There we go. If you want, you can put thread tape on there. I've never had an issue with it leaking, but if it does, a little bit of thread tape and it should be good. Yeah, it takes a 19 millimeter wrench. You just turn it, tighten it. Again, don't over tighten it. You don't want to strip out the threads or anything. Just until it's good and tight. It's getting there. Once you have that tight, just take your hose, connect it. Like so, and put your clamp back on. Might be a good idea to replace these hoses, but it'll work. So next I'm putting this pulley back on the AC compressor, and again, it faces this way. So the bolts will go in this way and the pulley will be in. There we go. And just cinch these down. And those 2 are 12 millimeter bolts. Again, they don't have to be crazy tight. Don't strip the bolts. Just nice and snug. Something I recommend doing is cleaning the mass airflow sensor, which is this right here, and that's the sensor. You only want to use mass airflow sensor cleaner on this, and you just spray it a couple times. Works better if you get a long nozzle straw to do this, so you get more pressure on it, and you just simply spray down into the sensor. It's So I'm going to do it in the trash here. Like so. And then you just let it air dry. And then you put it back on when you're done. So this is held on by 4 bolts. These are 10mm bolts. And inside you have these brackets, so when you remove the bolts they'll fall out. And that's how you re-secure this back to the box here. And you're ready to put it back on the car. Alright, so next I put this alternator in, and this is the most difficult alternator I've put in a Subaru. It did not want to fit in there. It took a while to get it to line up for whatever reason. But it's just 2 bolts. So you have this bolt here that connects to your power steering pump right here, and this controls the belt tension. So you adjust this bolt here to put tension on the belt, which will adjust where this sits in the car. And once you have the belt tension right, you'll tighten this down. But this bolt here, you want to do this one first. It slides through this part of the alternator and then comes back here, and then you use this bolt, well, not really a bolt, but this bracket here that the bolt goes into, and that's what actually holds the bolt in place. So I leave it a little bit loose for now because one of the covers that covers the belt will hook on the here, and then we can cinch it down. And then for the air intake over here, you just have that bracket there on the throttle body, this one here if you took it all apart. And of course we already connected the hoses down there to our air intake. There's 2 underneath there, which I've already shown. Then we have this big one right there that connects to this. But once we have our air filter in there, we can just cinch it down. I might have to do this with both hands, so let me put the camera down real quick, but just clip it down and then tighten your clamps. And there we go, we have it all cinched up with the air filter in. For whatever reason, this air box for these years can be a little bit tricky to get the filter in here and get this to cinch up right. Once you got it, make sure to hook up your mass airflow sensor cable. And then you can put it back on this little bracket right here, the wire, just to hold it. Like so. Alright, then I put on the new belts. You can't mix them up because the one for the alternator, power steering pump, is wider than the one for the AC compressor. So this belt wraps around these two, goes down up front here, while the AC belt is in the back, wraps around this pulley, and also that small pulley right there, which is for the tension. So to put tension on the belt, it is a 12mm socket. You just tighten it to adjust the tension on the belt to make it tighter. Same thing with the alternator here. Tighten this one to add tension. And you do this until you get the belt tension right. And then once you have the belt tension correct, you just tighten this bolt here to prevent the alternator from moving. And then you tighten this bolt here on the pulley to prevent that from moving, and that'll secure the belts. You also want to re-hook up the alternator. So that's pretty simple. This connector just plugs right in, right here, until it clicks. You pull this back, this just slides right down like so. And you just tighten the nut on, and that'll secure it. And then also you have this bracket here to hold down this cable. You just put it back in there, and then make sure to plug in your AC once again right here. Carefully drop in this radiator. So at the bottom of the radiator, there's 2 little things that stick down that have to slide in. So they're little slots for the radiator to fit into. It'll take a little bit of wiggling around and adjusting to get those to go in. Then you want to secure the radiator with the brackets. These are your 12mm bolts. Just tighten them till snug. Both sides. Then I'll put the intake snorkel back on. It just slides right on here. There's a little bit of a lip there. It'll grab and it'll hold. A little bit of force. And then you just bolt it on. This should be a 10mm bolt. Nothing crazy tight. And there we go. Then for the radiator, you want to put of course the hose on the little pipe here where your thermostat is and the water pump. And then of course connect your radiator fans on both sides. And you just tighten this clamp up and you should be good to go under here. Next I put on the belt covers. Put on this metal one first because it's this will slide right in between this bolt, but you have to put this one first so the plastic one can go on top. Just 10mm bolts for these ones. That one's a 12. So you have to tighten this one, this nut. And now for one of the more important parts, add in oil. I'm using Castrol 5W30 extended life for high mileage vehicles. These 2.5 engines with a filter change take about 4.7 quarts of oil. For the coolant reservoir, there's a little tab at the bottom. It slides into the radiator, and then it's held on by two 10mm bolts. Snug those up, and then connect the hose to your radiator. Next, you want to fill up with antifreeze. I'm using concentrated Prestone and distilled water. Use only distilled water when mixing. I got one of these fancy funnels. I'm just funneling it through the system and burping out the air. And then once it's full, and your overflow is all good, and you have it full of oil, we should be ready to start it up. Alright, so I connected the battery. Make sure to mount the battery as well. There's these studs here have little hooks on the end. They go into little holes, one on this side and the other side. And then you connect it all up. This is 10mm and it's 10mm to hook up the battery. Now we're ready to start. I'm going to leave this on here to burp the system once it's running. Make sure it's full of oil. So I disconnected the spark, and this will prevent the engine from running. What I'm going to do is crank the car until the oil pressure light goes away. Now if the oil pressure should be good now, reconnect the spark, and it should start up. This is our first start. It's alive! There goes the air bubbling out, and as that happens, I'm going to keep topping it off with coolant. Sounds good. I'm on a small test drive, and right away, for whatever reason, the speedometer's not working, so I'm going to have to figure that out. But overall, it's running nice and good. It's nice and smooth. Sounds good. Brakes are a little rough because it's been sitting for a while, so the rotor's kind of rusted. And the brake pads. But overall, not bad.